welcome back here to our next topic. And this is, of course, what I left off last time. We're going to get into what we call the Age of Invasion into the Middle East. About a 300-year period where these earliest of powers, the Umayyads and then the Abbasids, are now going to face invasions from both the West and the East. And these invasions are going to open up the door for a whole new power to take control of the Middle East. So let's go back to our map of what we left off with. And if you remember, if you look at this map here, this is the whole region that the Umayyads and then the Abbasids took over respectively, and they dominated the Middle East for a good few hundred years, really from about the 600s, late 600s, all the way until about the year 1000 AD. Around the year 1000 AD, we're going to see numerous invasions into this area. There are going to be three. We're going to talk about two of them in this lecture, and then we're going to save the third one for the next one, right? So we're going to kind of break this up into a couple of lectures here. And so who's invading? Where are they coming from? What are they going to do? That's essentially what I want you to know, right? Which powers are invading? What impacts does this invasion have on the Middle East? And just obviously any of the details I give you about each group that we talk about. So the first major invasion is going to take place right after 1000 AD, and it's from this group of people known as the Seljuks. So here are the Seljuks. It's spelled a little bit differently on the map than what I have here, but anytime you see the spelling, just kind of go with what terms I give you here. So there's the Seljuks around the year 1000 AD. Now, the Seljuks, who are they? Well, you can see where they come from. They come from a further eastern area. So if you look at our map, they come from a little bit further east than what we've been talking about. They sweep into the Middle East. Here's, of course, Baghdad, that center of the Abbasids, if you remember, Damascus, where the Umayyads were centered. And they're going to start to sweep into this whole area. Primarily, you see in kind of this yellowish orangish color here. Into the areas that were under the control of these various Muslim powers. Now, the Seljuks themselves will also be Muslims. They are Turkish Muslims, right? So they come from Turks as opposed to the other powers that came from Arabia. So they're going to be Muslims, but they're coming from a different region. And I will spend a lot of time on them. You see this one man, these are the key words, again, you need to know for them. A man named Tugrul, and he's from 1038 to 1063, and as always, you don't need to memorize the dates, but he's kind of the first major leader of the Seljuks. This is also around the time we start seeing the term sultan being used. That's going to be a term we're going to use a lot more later, but this is when the Seljuks first begin to kind of sweep into the Middle East a little bit. So you just need to know his name is one of the key guys. He's another really important man is a man named Alp Arslan. And this man named Alp Arslan, he is going to be important because of a very important battle he's going to be involved in. And you can see it there called the Battle of Manzikert, which is fought in 1071. Who are they fighting here? Well, in this case, this Battle of Manzikert in 1071 is actually not against the Abbasids. It's not against the Umayyads. Umayyads are way gone by now. It's against that Byzantine Empire. So if you remember last lecture, I kind of mentioned the Byzantine Empire. It dominated much of what we call Anatolia or Asia Minor, much of Greece. They control this whole region here. And it was the Seljuks who move in and fight this battle called the Battle of Manzikert in 1071. And they defeat the Byzantine emperor at the time, a man named Romanus IV, who was actually captured during this battle and then released for ransom. As a result of this, the Seljuks actually conquered a little bit of this area here that was once part of the Byzantine Empire. So the most important impact of the Seljuks is not necessarily on the Abbasids, but it is important because it weakens the Byzantine Empire and helps set into motion another invasion into the Middle East. And so this is going to begin the kind of picking apart of these areas, the decentralization of these areas. Remember, that's the whole theme, that you see this decentralization taking place under at the end of the Abbasid rules, and this is what's allowing the Seljuks to come in. So they come into the Middle East, They do a little bit of damage to the Byzantine Empire. That weakens the Byzantine Empire. Why is that important? It's all going to make sense in a couple more lectures from now, because some of you may already know where this is going. But this whole area that's on the Byzantine Empire, that region is eventually going to be part of what we call the Ottoman Empire. And that is all part, this is all part of the domino effect that allows the Ottoman Empire eventually to take that over. But we're still a few hundred years away from that happening. So that's why these stories are important, to understand kind of the domino effect. All right, so that's it. Pretty much all you need to know about the Seljuks. Just kind of know a couple names, Tugrul, Alparslan, as you can see there. Definitely the Battle of Manzikert. That's very important in terms of that battle that they defeat the Byzantine emperors in, and just kind of the influence they start to have there. Now, the Seljuks are not going to have this long-term powerhouse in the Middle East. In fact, they're about to get hit themselves by a Western invasion, and then eventually the Seljuks are going to lose influence in the Middle East, and again, other powers, more important Turkish powers, are going to take over. All right, so that's it. That's all you need to know about the Seljuks. Now, well, we jump ahead from about 1071, about 30 years. So here we are, about 30 years ahead now, about the year 1100, and we get to the next major invasion. That's, of course, going to be the Crusades. Now, here, just to give you understand the map again, what we're looking at here, here's that Battle of Manzikert, really tiny on this map. Here it says Seljuks, really small on this map. And what we need to know is, A, why did the Crusades happen, right? How did the Crusades impact the Middle East? That's essentially the two things we want to understand. How the Crusades happen and what impacts the Crusades have on the Middle East. So in terms of why the Crusades happened, there are several causes, but one of them is the Seljuks, right? And then I'm going to kind of go through the other causes as well. How are the Seljuks a cause of the Crusades? So the Crusades begin around 1100 AD. And, you know, a lot of people, I cover this a little differently when I teach my History of Western Civilization course, but a lot of people think of the Crusades as this kind of attempt of Western Europe to go and make everybody in the Middle East and beyond Christian. That's not really what the Crusades are about. They're very focused. It's primarily about the Holy Land. The Holy Land, of course, Jerusalem and these other cities around Jerusalem that are really important. And it's that these Western powers want to take over these areas. Why? What motivates them? Well, there are several motivations, one of which were the Seljuks. Now, how are the Seljuks a cause of the Crusades? So again, you want to know the causes. This is the first one. I want to give you perspective here. The Seljuks had moved in, they fight the Battle of Manzikert, and they conquer just a little bit of the eastern part of the Byzantine Empire. Way before the Seljuks, we already know that the Umayyads and the Abbasids had spread all the way across North Africa and into Spain. So if you're living in Western Europe around the year 1000 AD, Western and Central and even Eastern Europe, and you're looking at what's been going on basically from about 600s AD to now about 1071 AD, you're seeing various Islamic powers surround you. And so in some ways, the Seljuks helped bring about this other invasion into the Middle East. Now, is this to say without the Seljuks there wouldn't have been an invasion? Of course, there probably still would have been an invasion. The people in the West were probably sooner or later going to try to conquer Jerusalem, but the Seljuks definitely helped motivate them, right? It's just like, hey, you know, we're being surrounded on the East and the West and so forth. So that's one of the causes of the Crusades, the Seljuks themselves. So I hope that's clear. Let's go through the rest of the causes. What motivates people from Western Europe to try to go all the way into the Middle East and conquer the Holy Land? So here again, the key words to the causes. The Seljuks, as I just mentioned. Another motivation as to why the Crusades happen is that during this time period, around the year 1100 AD, the Middle Ages in Western civilization, that's where we are, the Age of Faith. This is during the Middle Ages. It's the Age of Faith where Western European powers are deeply religious. The church is very powerful. The church has a lot of influence. If any of you take History 110 or if you've taken the History 110 class with me, that's a lot of fun. We spend a lot of time on this in that class, just explaining how the popes and the church was so influential in day-to-day lives and politics and everything. And so it's logical that this is a time period where somebody would say, hey, let's go on a crusade because you want to, you know, take this holy land and put it under Christian control. So that's one of the motivations as well. So one cause of the Crusades, as you can see, there's the Seljuks. There's kind of the strategic element. Another motivation was just that the Middle Ages in the West were this age of faith, and people wanted to, take this land of Jerusalem and make it their land again as they saw it. I'm going to show you some images as well here in a moment of what's so important to Christians in Jerusalem. Another important cause of the Crusades is the story of a man named Al-Hakim. This happens in the late 1000s as well, right before the First Crusades. Who's Al-Hakim? Al-Hakim was this powerful leader in Egypt during the time period right before the Crusades began. And he's sometimes nicknamed the Mad Caliph because what he decides to do is go into Jerusalem and destroy parts of what was called the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. I'm not going to show you pictures of it in a moment. And this was a Christian shrine, very important Christian church. And people in the West heard about this and they go, oh man, look at these Muslim powers in the Middle East. They're destroying our Christian shrines and our Christian churches, I should say. And, Al-Hakim was the exception to the rule. Most of the time, if you were living in the Middle East and you opened up a church, you'd be fine. Practice your religion, pay the jizya as we talked about in the other lectures. All that's fine and dandy. Al-Hakim was the exception. And even after him, the leaders rebuilt and they allowed Christians to pray in the Holy Land and all of that. But that was what the people in the West used as their excuse, or at least one of the reasons, to launch the Crusade. So it's when Al-Hakim, this kind of Egyptian leader, destroyed the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So that's another reason. A fourth reason why the Crusades happen around 1100 AD is this Western power is stronger, right? The Western power is stronger now. So when I put Western power there, what I mean by that is, you go, why didn't they do this earlier, right? Because if you think about it, the Muslims' powers have been controlling Jerusalem since the Umayyad period. Remember the Dome of the Rock and everything. Why didn't they do this 200-300 years earlier? Well, 200-300 years earlier, 400 years earlier, the Western powers were weak. There was no real strong kingdoms. They were divided up into these little tribes. And it wasn't until around 1100 that you had powerful kingdoms like England and France and Germany, or the Holy Roman Empire, that could actually launch these invasions. So part of it is the timing of why it happens when it does. There were economic motivations to go on the Crusades. For some people, it wasn't even about the issue at all about religion or strategic reasons. It was simply economic. I put this term there called primogeniture. And what that term primogeniture means is that the eldest son inherits. And that was the primary way things were done in Western civilization in the Middle Ages. Well, that's great if you're the eldest son. If you're not the eldest son, well, that means that you're kind of not getting the land, and this therefore gives you an opportunity. If you have an opportunity to go on a crusade, now you can go to the Middle East, get your own land. There's a lot of real estate there. One of the things that people need to understand about the Holy Land at that time, Jerusalem, all that region around it, very uninhabited. There wasn't a large population of people there at the time. Remember, ever since the Jewish people were kind of forced out, remember we talked about the time of Hadrian and the massacre of the Jewish people, and there really wasn't a large population of people in the area, and it's good land, it's right on the coast, and therefore a lot of people were willing to go on this crusade because they wanted land. The final cause of the crusade, I'm going to show you some images, is the Pope at the time. Pope Urban II in 1095 is going to give a very famous speech. He's going to go to France, give a speech, and I'm just going to read to you a small paragraph. And this is the last kind of cause of the crusade. When he makes this speech, then boom, the crusades begin. Here he goes. This is what he said. I'm just going to read you a paragraph. He says, O bravest knights, descendants of unconquered ancestors, do not be weaker than they, but remember their courage. Set out on the road to the Holy Sepulchre. Take that land from the wicked people and make it your own. Jerusalem is the best of all lands, and more fruitful than all others. This land our Savior made illustrious by his birth, and beautiful with his life, and sacred with his suffering. This royal city is now held captive by our enemies, and made pagan by those who know not God. She asks and longs to be liberated and does not cease to beg you to come to her aid. Set on this journey and you will obtain the remission of your sins and be sure of the incorruptible glory of the kingdom of heaven. So what you're looking at here is the Pope is, selling the Crusades, saying, hey, you do this, you get salvation. That's the age of faith. But he's also saying, hey, this is very fruitful land. It's a great piece of real estate. So even the Pope is motivating people to go on this Crusades for land, not just for religious reasons. All right, so I hope all that's clear. Understand why the Western powers are going to launch this invasion into the Middle East. This is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre that I was referring to. These are just a couple pictures I snapped when I was there. This is on the left, the church. On the right, inside the church, is what is supposed to be the tomb of Christ. Obviously, no body there. But for Christians, this would be a very important place, right? Obviously, these are really, you could see why there would be a religious motivation for Christians to go and conquer Jerusalem, right? You have the church where Christ was buried, his tomb. This is another image. It's a very famous street that I walked through called the Via Dolorosa. I took a picture of the street and the street sign for you when I was there. And some of you may recognize this, some of you may not. But this is the road where Christ carried the cross before the crucifixion. So again, there are a lot of things in Jerusalem and all of what is modern day Israel and surrounding areas that are very important spiritually for the Christian people. And so this is, again, the whole age of faith. Okay, so I just want to show you a couple images. This is Pope Urban II. He was the one, again, who made the official call for the Crusades in 1095. All right, so you have a number of crusades. I'm not going to go through all the crusades in this class. There's actually many crusades. The First Crusade, Second Crusade, Third Crusade, Fourth Crusade, and there's a whole bunch of other little ones. I'm really going to just focus on primarily the Third Crusade. I guess I could say so. In 1100, you had the First Crusade. The only thing you need to know about the First Crusade is it was very successful from the Western powers. The Western powers entered the Middle East. They conquered the Holy Land. That you do want to know, that you had the First Crusade around the year 1100 AD, and they conquered the Holy Land. But of course, the Muslim powers in the Holy Land are not just going to sit there and go, oh, well, they're going to start fighting back. And so the First Crusade was around 1100 AD. And between 1100 and 1189 AD, you're still going to have continuing fighting. And by the time we get to 1189 AD, you get the most famous of the Crusades, the Third Crusade. And this is the one I do spend a little bit more time talking about in my History of the Middle East class because it's more relevant to the Middle East, right? They're all important, but this one especially. So the Third Crusade had a number of really important people involved. So here again, the key words. The first three names there, Richard the Lionhearted, Frederick Barbarossa, and Philip II. Who are these guys? Well, you want to know all three and where they were from. Richard the Lionhearted, or Richard I, he was the King of England. Frederick Barbarossa was the King of Germany, or the Holy Roman Emperor. Either way, sometimes they're called the King of Germany, sometimes called the Holy Roman Emperor. Either one is fine. And Philip II was the King of France. So these three monarchs, three of the strongest kings in Europe, all go on this Third Crusade, right? So just kind of know that. The Muslim powers, by now, remember, this is already way past this period of time of when the Seljuks and everything, we're 100 years later now, were led primarily by a man named Saladin. Saladin, what do you need to know about him? Several things. So Saladin, he was born in a city called Tikrit, which is in modern day Iraq, which is actually, let me show you a photo and an image in a second. I don't know if anybody recognized that city, but that's where Saddam Hussein was born as well. I'm going to show you kind of an interesting image related to that in a moment. But Saladin, he is the guy who's going to lead the Muslim forces, and he comes from a family dynasty called the Ayyubid dynasty. Now, what happens is right before the Third Crusade begins, there was a man named Renaud, right? Who is this guy named Renaud? He is a French guy who was disrupting the caravans in the Middle East for the Ayyubids, right? So the Ayyubids had all these caravans. He was threatening to attack the city of Mecca, threatening to attack the city of Medina, and it was Saladin who was very much provoked by this. Saladin is like, what is this guy Renaud doing? He's creating havoc. He's trying to go after our caravan. He's threatening Mecca, threatening Medina. And he really motivates Saladin to get the Holy Land back. So remember, First Crusade succeeds. The First Crusade, the Holy Land was conquered. It was under Christian control. From that point on, from about 1100 until about 1189, there are various conflicts and so forth. But by the 1180s, now the Muslim powers under Saladin are really ready to kind of retake Jerusalem again. And they do in what is called the Battle of Hattin in 1187, right? And this was again led by Saladin. And this is the Battle of Hattin, which allowed Saladin and the Muslim powers to retake Jerusalem again. Saladin does this by using all sorts of very good techniques of fighting, including these interesting guys known as the sappers. This is interesting. These were individuals that he would use as he's going to attack various fortresses that the Crusaders created between the First Crusade and the Third Crusade. The Crusaders had a lot of fortresses they created. And what they would do is they would actually kind of dig underground, right? So if there was a fortress, they would start from just kilometers away and very quietly they would dig. So this is the fortress, right? My drawing is horrible. And from kilometers away, they would dig underground and they would dig and they would dig and they would dig about 50 yards a day. So it would take them a while. And they would dig underground unannounced to the crusading powers that had been in these fortresses. And then they would set fires right under the foundations, very hot fires, apparently can get to like 1500 degrees, and that would weaken the foundation. And then when Saladin came to invade, he could topple the fortresses down easily and win. And this is how, using these methodologies, Saladin very effectively was able to retake Jerusalem. So this, of course, triggers the Third Crusade, right? So now the Crusaders are like, hey, we lost Jerusalem. Let's go on this Third Crusade. And there's this massive fighting that now continues from 1189 to 1192. As the fighting goes on in the Third Crusade, sometimes Saladin has victories, sometimes Richard has victories. One city near Jerusalem is called the city of Akko. It's spelled A-C-R-E, as you can see there, but it's pronounced Akko. And Richard actually wins there, but he does something pretty horrible there called the massacre at Akko, where he captured thousands of Muslim soldiers. He disarmed them. And then I'm going to show you an image here in a moment. I'll show you some images of all this as well. He beheaded them. So this is referred to as the massacre at Akko. Interestingly, Saladin was much more compassionate. In fact, there's one other story that during one of the battles, Richard was hurt and his horse was killed. Saladin found out about that, and Saladin gave Richard his horse and his own doctor, to try to take care of him, because if he's going to beat him, he wants to beat him fair and square. And we also know that Saladin, after he conquered Jerusalem, allowed Christians to pray there. So, in that time and place, it was the powers in the Middle East that showed a lot of tolerance towards the various powers. Obviously, there's going to be fighting. Obviously, there's going to be killing. But considering what Richard did at the massacre at Akko, Saladin was definitely the one trying to provide at least people there with a little bit more better circumstance. All right, so all of that is going on, and at the end of the day, after all this fighting, Saladin wins, right? Long story short, Saladin wins. The Third Crusade fails. Jerusalem maintains under Islamic power. But all of these crusades are still taking a toll on the Middle East, right? It's still a lot of fighting and a lot of casualties. This is all part of the Age of Invasion. And again, why all this matters, you're going to see as we move forward. All right, so let me show you some pictures. And this is the one of Saladin and Saddam Hussein. So when Saddam Hussein was in power, Saddam was no Saladin, I promise you that. We'll talk about Saddam Hussein at the end of the semester a bit. Very interesting story. He would put propaganda photos all around Iraq, kind of trying to equate himself with Saladin because they were both born in the city of Tikrit. So I saw this in a source in a book once. I'm like, oh, that's kind of interesting. I'll use that. And you can see like the horses on one side and the tanks on the other side there. These are just a couple sculptures. Richard the Lion-Hearted, right? His big sculpture is outside the Parliament building in England, still stands there today. This is a sculpture of Saladin in the city of Damascus. So just images of these two very well-known individuals who are part of the Third Crusade. And this is the image of the massacre at Akko that I mentioned, right, where Richard went and he just massacred all the Islamic soldiers there. All right, so after that, after the Third Crusade ends, Saladin dies. Saladin dies a few years after the Third Crusade, which gets us to kind of our last part of our story of the Crusades, the Fourth Crusade. And the Fourth Crusade, I don't know if you can see here, is about the year 1200 AD. If you can't see the numbers, the dates here on the other side of the map, around 1200 AD. So here's our map again, right? You can see the city of Akko that I mentioned in Jerusalem. And so Saladin dies, so the people in the West say, hey, let's go launch another crusade. Now, the Fourth Crusade is fascinating because what happens in the Fourth Crusade is at this point, you're going to have another invasion into the area. But when they launched this Fourth Crusade, the Western powers, they don't have a lot of money. The Third Crusade took a lot of wealth, a lot of money, bankrupted them. And so when they go on this Fourth Crusade, they go to Venice, first of all. You don't need to worry about that so much. They go to the city of Venice. The Crusaders go, hey, we want to go on a crusade. We want to get to the Holy Land. We want to retake the city. Saladin is dead. And the people in Venice say, sure, we'll help you. And they begin to make their way. Now, as they make, this is crazy story, follow me on this. As they make their way to the Holy Land, they get to Constantinople, okay? They get to Constantinople, and when they get to Constantinople, around the year 1200, the city of Constantinople is the capital of the Byzantine Empire, okay? So they get to Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, and the emperor there had just been overthrown from power. His son, a man named Alexius, makes a deal with the Crusaders where he offers them a lot of money if they help him and his father retake control of Constantinople and the Byzantine Empire. So he's trying to make a deal with these Crusaders. Remember, the Crusaders, they're thinking, well, we want to go to the Holy Land, right? We want to go all the way here to the Holy Land. But they kind of stop here at Constantinople. And this son of the emperor, a man named Alexius, the son of the Byzantine emperor, is trying to convince them to help him retake control of the Byzantine Empire. This all had to do with internal issues within the Byzantine Empire. And he offers them a lot of money, 200,000 marks of silver. Well, he offers them this money. The Crusaders agree. They get there. And then Alexius says, well, I don't really have this money. And the Fourth Crusade, they get to Constantinople. They see this beautiful city. They see Alexius doesn't have the money. And then they sack the city of Constantinople. They loot the city of Constantinople. And then they go back home. They never even go to the Holy Land again. They leave this whole area of the Middle East alone. So you go, well, why is this important? Why is this invasion important to the Middle East? Well, again, they hit the Byzantine Empire. They weaken the Byzantine Empire. Remember I said the Seljuks weakened the Byzantine Empire? So the Seljuks weakened the Byzantine Empire. The Crusades weakened the Byzantine Empire. The Crusades also weakened the Seljuks and all these other powers in the Middle East as well. All these powers, all the fighting. So you got a lot of the Middle Eastern powers are being weakened. You've got the Byzantine Empire being weakened. And this is what's creating this power vacuum that's eventually going to allow the Ottomans to take over. And if you again know anything about the Ottoman Empire, this area of the Byzantine Empire is where the Ottomans begin, and then they'll spread outward to the rest of the Middle East. So that's why the Crusades important. The Fourth Crusade especially, as you go, it only impacts the Western civilization. It impacts Byzantine Empire, yes, but it helps bring about this kind of vacuum of power, which then allows the other civilization of the Ottomans to move in later. All right, so I said there were three major invasions. The Seljuks were one, the Crusades were two, but there was one more invasion that's going to complete this kind of age of invasion and this power vacuum in the Middle East. And you could hear when this invasion was coming, because you would hear the beating of the drums of the very famous or infamous Mongol hordes. And here are our Mongols And that is going to be our story for our next lecture, because the Mongols from clear, farther east than anything we've seen in this class are going to sweep in, and they're going to do some damage as well into the Middle East, complete the age of invasion, complete the power vacuum, and open the door up for our new civilization. So next lecture, a brief little lecture on the Mongols, which you definitely want to listen to. All right, I'll stop the drum beating. All right, take care. Hope that was interesting. Let me know if you have any questions.